Yeah, I'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for being here. Pear Psylla Phenology and Management. So may already be very familiar, but to be on the same page. So we're talking about phenology. That's the timing of generations and life stages. So the phenology model is predicting that phenology. Because temperature is usually the most important factor, or one of them, for insect growth rates. By knowing the temperature, you can calculate these degree days. It's a measure of the physiological time of the insect. So you can predict their development better than like on a calendar basis. So a lot of people know the codling moth model. We can, on a degree day basis, temperature accumulation, predict when these 3 generations of larvae are present, representing when the eggs hatch. And you help that to line up your sprays. So don't spray here when if you're targeting the larvae, spray here. Phenology-based management is really not a new idea. You can go all the way back to 1906. Axel Molander, an entomologist from WSU, wrote, "Spraying every 2 weeks will be seen to be unnecessary. It's not how many times you spray that counts, but how well you do it at the proper time." And they made these very similar looking charts as like what I showed you on the last slide. So that brings us to how we're trying to connect Pear Psylla phenology with management. So recently, Vince Jones made a Pear Psylla model. This is kind of what it looks like in its raw form. We have different life stages and different generations occurring on Pear Psylla degree days. So this is nice, but then the work that Louis Nottingham and I have been doing is how do we take that and turn it into a tool that you can actually use with management? And thanks to Washington State Department of Agriculture and Fresh Process Pear Committee for funding this work that we've been doing. So the first thing we did was identify spray materials. We looked at things that are biocontrol compatible and incompatible, or in other words, how selective they are, or some people call them soft sprays or harsh sprays. We did that by looking at the literature and doing some new tests. So a lot of this had already been done by Tiana DuPont, who, for example, in their project had this list of spray materials that are compatible with biocontrol. And that was good, but then, going back to Axel Molander, do you want to just pick something on that list every 2 weeks and spray it? A better idea is to time this, harm the pest at the best time to harm it and avoid harming the beneficial insects. So we've changed the way the model looks to, this is what exists on our public webpage, which is here. And Good Fruit Grower made this nicer looking version for their magazine that shows different Pear Psylla life stages and generations, and we added where we think good timings for sprays are. I'm not going to go over all of this, but on that website, our guidelines exist in the form of degree day timings and then ideas for management at those timings. So some notes on these guidelines is on the left, there's a conventional version, and on the right is certified organic compatible guidelines. In this conventional, as we call it, is an integrated program. And how it really works is conserving biocontrol agents. It's integrating biocontrol and chemical control. This is in contrast to, in the Wenatchee Valley where I'm located and a lot of my work is, conventional historically means reliance on pesticides, harsh pesticides that are not compatible with biocontrol. And it's kind of, with that strategy, we have been left with Pear Psylla as the #1 pear pest in the state for many, many decades. So we're trying to find a better way, this integrated framework for management. That's how it's set up. So here's how they work. Here's another visualization. So you see we got 3 generations of Pear Psylla adults in blue, 3 generations of the early nymphs, the young ones look like that, and then the older nymphs we call hard shells. So first generation, this is what's happening now in the world in different locations. The tricky part here is that the biocontrol agents can be present, but there's not enough of them and they're not active enough yet to suppress Pear Psylla. So you need to do some sprays of this generation. Caitlin Clay Surround is great for this time. We found that a dormant spray. So pretty much as soon as it's safe to enter your orchard during the dormant period, if you get surround on, that does a great job of just keeping adults off the trees. The next timing bud burst, when the buds look like that, Pear Psylla love to lay their eggs on that freshly emerging green tissue. So that's a good time to spray surround again, just keep the adults off the trees. And then this popcorn stage, basically right before bloom, is your last chance to get surround on. And on top of that, there's other insecticide options like oil. Lime sulfur harms Pear Psylla and is good against mites. Pyriproxyfen works by sterilizing adults, so this bud burst timing is a good time right before they're ready to lay most of their eggs on the emerging tissues. Cinerate and azadirachtin kill adults. Centar bupropion, that also harms Pear Psylla, and it's great for mealybugs. So within that list, I didn't include any broad spectrum sprays. These are all like selective or relatively soft sprays. Bexar is probably the most effective Pear Psylla insecticide that we have at the moment. So you can use that at this time, but if you use it in spring, please don't treat the next generation with it because that will accelerate evolution of resistance to this chemical. Malathion and neonics also work against Pear Psylla, but don't use Warrior 2 pyrethroids. Pear Psylla has evolved resistance to pyrethroids. Broad spectrum is not always needed. So here's some data from 2 years of studies at our research farm. So we had check plots in these bars. When you don't spray anything, you get a lot of Pear Psylla. In a surround program, we sprayed surround twice. In a conventional program, we did surround once with malathion plus Bexar, Assail, and Ryman. And you got the same result between this addition of all those broad spectrums in a conventional program didn't really help. So 2 surrounds is as good as 1 surround plus 3 broad spectrums. Additional evidence comes from my ongoing evaluation of our guidelines in commercial orchards. So we had 8 conventional orchards versus 8 here at Pheno. Those guidelines I talked about, they started the season with a similar number of Pear Psylla adults. As sprays went on for the rest of the spring, there was really no difference in adults between the programs. There actually tended to be a little more eggs and nymphs in the conventional program. So again, in IPM, with our phenology-based guidelines, it's these things that I already mentioned: no malathion, no pyrethroids, and no Ryman, which are things that the conventional orchards usually used. And sorry if my video went out because my camera does that. So sorry about that. Won't go back on. I'll keep going. So that was first generation spring. Moving into summer, this is where the pest phenology really comes into play to time sprays, and it's also time to consider biocontrol. So biocontrol and IPM and pear. We talk about IPM, integrated pest management. Big part of that, it means integrating sprays with biocontrol conservation. We have a lot of good beneficial insects in pear orchards if the spray program's compatible. So I want to go over some of them. This is Trecnites. It's a parasitoid wasp and is very tiny. They lay their egg in the Pear Psylla nymph. Normally, the nymph will grow into a healthy hard shell, but when it's parasitized, it turns into a mummy. That is a dead nymph that has been eaten from the inside out by the wasp larva. Deriocaris is a predatory bug. They have a needle-like mouth to attack the nymphs. This is the adult bug, and the immature bug, the nymph, also is a predator. Campiloma is similar. You might be familiar with it as an apple pest, but they don't damage pears. And they also have got that needle-like mouth to attack Pear Psylla. European earwig is another important predator. They don't have the needle mouth, they have the chewing mouth. They eat the Pear Psylla. I want to plug, I have an upcoming project where if you are interested in getting earwigs for your orchard, we're going to have a workshop in July where you can collect them, bring them home to your farm. This is a new project funded by Western SARE. Thank you, Western SARE. And last one, a kind of more speculative or fun one is I see sometimes on my monitoring these whirligig mites, little red mites that travel in these like figure eight spiral patterns. These are well-known aphid predators, and they're probably eating Pear Psylla too. So we've got beneficial mite predators in the system too. Okay, so with all that in mind, now let's talk about bloom time is a good time to put out calling moth mating disruption. So in a lot of conventional orchards I work in, the managers say, well, we don't use mating disruption because we spray so much anyway that it doesn't add any value. So in the integrated program, like the guidelines, we turn that thinking around as like start with mating disruption. Then you can do a soft calling moth program that is effective using things like oil virus, Intrepid, and Alticore, and avoid the harsher options like Ryman and Delegate. That sets you up to have Pear Psylla biocontrol, and then you don't spray as harsh things and not as much for Pear Psylla. So this is how the guidelines are set up to conserve biocontrol. For the second generation, the timings are meant to target the Pear Psylla adults, eggs, and the younger nymphs, soft shells, not so much the hard shells because those are hard to kill. The goal is to keep your biocontrol in the orchard and not spray more, don't do counterproductive sprays. So here are more evidence. I showed you spring data from my project last year. Here is in the summer. So conventional orchards were using broad spectrum sprays like Bexar, Ryman, Delegate, Sale, Actara, Agrimec. Altar is a soft option, but they include it in there too. So these sprays did a great job at killing Pear Psylla nymphs. You can see the red triangles, but they also killed off all the natural enemies in the orchard. So that's the second generation. When you get to the, I'm sorry, we're sticking to second generation. Contrast with our Phenology IPM sites, these are some of the options they used. Didn't do as good a job at killing Pear Psylla, but you can see the natural enemies started to build up. Now, bringing in the third generation, natural enemies responded and occurred in the IPM plots. As a result, they decreased Pear Psylla around harvest time, but conventional orchards had outbreaks, they had sticky harvests, and a big increase in adults at the end of the season. So the situation we have here is that IPM risks damage during that second generation, but conventional orchards risk it at third generation, they get sticky harvests. IPM tends to be cleaner at harvest time. So given those challenges, we also have in the guidelines cultural tactics like tree washing and summer pruning. Those are timed around this time when the hard shells are present. Hard shells hard to kill, just wash the honeydew off, and then you can also just prune off, the summer pruning you can help by pruning off infested limbs. That improves your spray coverage later too. So here's a good resource. You can see with an overhead system, wash away the honeydew. And on this link here, Tiana and Chris Strom have prepared from case study information, stuff about like the nozzles and kinds of systems and costs that you can build for overhead systems if you're interested in that. To summarize the outcome of our phenology-based IPM programs, in the first year that those 8 orchards used it, insecticide materials costs were on average less than the conventional, and damage was similar. So again, IPM experienced damage in the second generation, conventional got in the third generation, and the damage was similar. There was variation within management. So some IPM orchards were awesome, some conventional orchards were good, but then some conventional orchards were awful. Some IPM orchards were not good. So there's variation. If you're interested, so this evaluation of the guidelines is continuing for a second year. On the project, I send out scouting data from all of those 19 orchards we go to, information about where different sites are in the phenology model, and then associated guidelines. If you would like, even if you're not on that project, you can sign up. We're calling it Pear Entomology Weekly. Email me if you would like a weekly public update with this kind of information. So again, what I showed you was the first year of orchards using an IPM program. The natural enemies failed to show up at 2 of the sites, basically. A little slow at 3 sites, but they worked great at 3 other sites. All the IPM sites and the conventional sites lacked earwigs. they are slow to disperse. So if they were eliminated, which they often are in conventional spray programs, you don't have them. They take years to establish. So that's another reason I'm doing that project. If you're going to try IPM or you're in the middle, organic transition or trying out IPM could be a good case to try to release earwigs in the orchard. We also think IPM is probably going to work better in the second year as natural enemy populations build up. A lot of people often say it takes 3 years before these communities stabilize and start to provide better control. And natural enemies are now overwintering in those IPM pear orchards. So in year 1, the outcomes were similar. In year 2, we think our guidelines might work even better, and we're testing that this season. So take homes, conventional as it is practiced in my region, typically eliminates earwigs and other beneficials. If you keep your broad spectrum sprays to pre-bloom, you can save those beneficials and biocontrol can work. Again, year 1 of IPM worked about the same as conventional, I should say 2022, last year. And we think it might work better this year. Overhead washing was important to success and is continuing to research. We're trying to study what other factors affect success of IPM in general and our specific guidelines. So we're still working on it. I'm sure this will be covered later, but just to go over, you can get this model on Decision Aid System. We also have a public page that gets some degree days from DAS at a limited number of sites that show it beside our model. And again, you can sign up for that Pear Entomology Weekly if you email. That's my presentation.